Howdy Cowgirl, what channel are you on today?
Cowhide music.
And what are we reviewing today?
Mojotone Tweed Vibrolux. Let's get into the video.
Howdy folks, it's Nathan here with Cowhide Music, bringing you another video review today. Today we're going to be looking at the, I guess this is the Mojotone Tweed Vibrolux based off of the classic Fender Tweed Vibrolux 5F11 circuit. What I have here today is a custom kit from Mojotone that I put together myself. Traditionally, they sell the kit that comes in just a combo amp. What I did was bought the 5F11 kit, but I put it into a Tweed head that would fit a Tweed Deluxe head, and then stacked it on a 210 cabinet that I put in Jensen special design C10Q ceramic speakers. It's a fun amp to play. It's a really nice, I think between 10 and 12 watt amp. It sounds bigger with the 210 cabinet, and it was a lot of fun to put together, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, including going over the schematic and let you hear how it sounds. And if you're interested in putting one of these kits together, drop me a line if you have any questions about it. It's not too hard to do if you have a little background in electronics and a little background with soldering. So stay tuned. Alright, so here's the top panel of the amp. Controls are pretty simple on this amplifier. There's a depth and a speed for the tremolo circuit. So the depth just sets your intensity of the tremolo and the speed sets the rate. Pretty standard for a tremolo amp. And then otherwise, it really is just a volume and a tone. So this is a non-master volume amp. If you want more, you just turn the volume up more. The other great thing about this amp is the controls go to 12, which means it's 2 louder. And also there are 3 instrument inputs. And when we talk about the circuit, we'll talk about why there are 3 inputs on this amp and what their function is. Here is a single button foot switch. I don't believe I bought this one from Mojotone. I think I bought it separately, but this can control the tremolo on or off by foot switch. That way you don't have to be back here to turn the depth down all the way to 0 or all the way to 1. Yeah, so let's actually take a look inside of the amp chassis itself and show you what the circuit looks like when you solder it all together. Okay, here we are inside the chassis of this amp. It's a fairly standard tube amp circuit. Over here you have your power transformer, which supplies the 6Y or the 5Y3 rectifier. That produces your plate voltage for your 6V6s and also the 12AX7s. In this amp currently, I think I have groove tube 6V6s. I had these in a different amp, but I thought when I put them in here, they sounded better in this amp. So I stole them from something else I had. And then I believe in here are 12AX7s from JJ, pretty standard. Here you have your row of filter caps. That is for filtering your high voltage for the plate voltages. On the right-hand side, you have what you would have standard, which is your input as far away from the power section as possible. So there are 3 inputs. And as we discussed when looking at the circuit, we have 3 sets of 68K ohm resistors. Those things act to allow you to plug in instruments of different output levels into the amp, depending on just depending on how much output level you have, you can plug into channel 1, channel 2, or channel 3 and vary the impedance from your signal to the first preamp tube. I would say the only issue I had with this amp building was the feedback to the tremolo circuit. So this is from this point in the amp back here, you can't see, that goes to pin 7 on that 12AX7, and that completes the loop for the tremolo oscillator. I was having all sorts of sort of pickup and bad tremolo noise coming from this, so I ended up replacing what was a standard white wire that goes underneath the board and comes out of a hole with a shielded cable that I just jumpered in here. And once I put that shielded cable in, everything seemed to work fairly well. So it's the one thing to note is that you can put the amp together exactly as the schematic says, but there's a little bit of art to actually routing the wires to minimize noise pickup and to make the amp actually perform the best. And I'm not going to claim to be the best at this. This is the first amp that I've built. In fact, I think it's the only amp I've built up to this point. I'd love to get back into it, but there are, time considerations at hand. So, yeah, but, a really fun project. Takes probably anywhere between 2 and 4 days to put together, depending on how motivated you are to get it done. I highly recommend putting one of these together. There's nothing more satisfying than firing it up and hearing it make a good sound and being satisfied that you can play through something that you built yourself. So yeah, with a little bit of electronic experience and a little bit of soldering experience, these are great projects, and I highly recommend you checking out, whether for Mojotone or for a different company. All right, here we are looking at the Fender Vibrolux 5F11 schematic. Just to note, if you buy the kit from Mojotone like I did, they also supply a schematic. And I'd like to point out that there are two subtle differences. One of them, actually I think both of them are important to make. In case one, over here on the input part of the Mojotone circuit, they add a 1 mega ohm resistance here between the input signal and ground, and what that really is what we call a grid bleed resistor. You're going to want that resistor. It's not in the Fender schematic. There should be a 1 mega ohm resistor between this point and this point right here. It's neglected in the schematic. I have never actually seen the inside of an old 5F11 from Fender, so I don't know if this is a schematic error only or whether the circuits were built that way. But that should be part of the circuit. The other difference concerns this part of the circuit here, which I'm circling. This is the fixed bias voltage for the output 6v6s. In the Mojotone schematic, this capacitor here is also shown as an electrolytic polarized capacitor, but it's shown backwards. The way that it should be is actually for the Fender schematic. The positive should be at ground, and the negative should be here on this side of the diode. So we'll see here in the Mojotone schematic, that same circuit configuration is here. This is an error in the Mojotone schematic. So the operation of this amp is actually fairly simple. There are two 12AX7 tubes, two 6v6 output tubes, and a 5Y3 rectifier. The first tube half of the tube acts as the first preamp stage. The other half of the tube acts as a tremolo oscillator. The input section of this amplifier is actually pretty cool. There's 3 input jacks, and if you plug into input jack number 1, it might look like you're going through a 68K resistor, but if you examine the schematic carefully, what you'll notice is that, in fact, these 3 68K resistors are in parallel, which means your impedance between your signal and the first preamp tube here is only 22.6K. And so you actually have, what's going on here in the circuit is you have different inputs for different instruments with different output levels. So if you have like a lower output level pickup, you would go into 1. If you have a little bit more output from your pickups, you might go into 2. And if you got a really hot pickup, you might go into 3. And you can basically use those 3 inputs without having to change the settings of the amp to sort of get similar performance out of the amp. It's actually kind of fun to take to set the amp up with a single coil kind of Strat guitar and plug it into one and get a good tone out of it, and then to go get something like an ES335 and take the full humbucker output and put that into jack 1 and just absolutely overdrive this amp. That can actually be a lot of fun too. The tremolo circuit here is used to modulate the output volume. The 5F11 circuit does this in a way that is pretty different from the way that they do it now. For these smaller wattage amps, what they ended up doing was putting the depth knob, which is basically the intensity of the tremolo, between the fixed bias grid or the fixed bias voltage for the output tube grids and the tremolo oscillator. So when the depth is all the way up, that is, you want all of the tremolo, the output tube bias voltage on the grid is being purely supplied by the tremolo oscillator. And conversely, when you have the depth knob, the depth knob rolled all the way off, such that you're getting no tremolo, you're shutting off the tremolo. The grid voltage, or the bias voltage for the output grid, for the output tube grid, is supplied from the fixed bias circuit. Other than that, it's a fairly straightforward circuit. You come in, you amplify, come off the plate. You go through a volume pot and a tone pot. This tone circuit here is one of the older Fender tone circuits, which simply has a 1 meg potentiometer and a capacitor to ground, and then you have another capacitor whose ground path goes through the volume potentiometer, which basically means in this amp that your tone knob and your volume knob are coupled. It's just one of the unique characters of the amp. I think in later versions of later on Fender amps, they changed that such that you would decouple the volume from the tone stack. But in this amp, you have to live with it. That's the design. This 12AX7 has one more preamp stage, and then the second part of the 12AX7 is what we call the phase inverter for basically pushing the 6V6s out of phase. That is, this is what we call a push-pull amplifier, and so the phase of the signal going to this 6V6 needs to be out of phase with this 6V6 so that they can basically slosh back and forth. And that's how this amplifier works. And then after that, it goes directly to the output transformer into the speaker. I think this amp puts out something like about 10 watts. And what's really nice about it is you can crank the volume all the way up on this amp and still listen to it in your house. It's not terribly loud, and it sounds really good in my opinion. So let's next go take a look at let's hear how this amp actually sounds. All right, folks, so we're back. Now it's time to actually hear how this thing sounds. I've got my ES335, one of my favorite guitars, actually. Don't break out enough, I guess, because I spent too much money on it. Keep the cheap guitars out, I guess. But yeah, so while I've been making this video, I had some time. I made a short loop track to play over and to let you hear how the amp sounds. So I recorded directly into a Electro-Harmonix Nano Loop 360. So the guitar went into that clean. I played that with a Stratocaster on the neck pickup. And now I'm going to play a lead part over that using the ES335. I think I'm going to play on the neck pickup as well. I tend to like the neck pickup on guitars. That's just my preference. So I've got the amp set for reasonably loud volume in the room. Any kind of distortion tone that you hear is coming from the amp being overdriven. There's no pedals in this. So let's get at it. it. I hope you liked the video. Again, if you have an opportunity to build your own tube amp, it's a really cool project. Kits are available from a number of companies. I just happened to buy from Mojotone because I just kind of thought they had everything together and good schematics. Yeah, so if you like the video, subscribe to the channel and make sure you hit the notification button. Plan on making a video every week or every 2 weeks. Kind of a busy guy, but yeah, I like to at least share my hobby with you guys. So thank you for watching. Talk to you later.